So this is our final keynote coming up. And I want to thank all the moderators, all the speakers, panelists for this wonderful day. And it's with a lot of pleasure and emotion as well that I'm calling the person, the brain, the style, the panache in French, who was very critical for the birth of FARI, Hugues Bersini, professor at Iridia at Université Libre de Bruxelles, and founder of FARI, and he will give us, I don't like to call it a farewell speech, but let's call it this way for today. So, yeah, Hugues, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Carl. I don't have the pointers. I need to be afraid. It's always to be kind of afraid when you see a farewell talk. That means that you have to leave, and you have your best colleagues who push you away. It's a farewell talk, so please leave us. And well, I would prefer to call it a FARI welcome. FARI well, it's good. Right. So this is the pointers. Okay, so as you can see the title, numerical comments are the only democratic path for the algorithms that shape us. So yeah, definitely I'm going to leave some of my workload, and mainly I had together with my very good friend Marco Dorigo, I had an Iridia lab together with our best AI researcher in Belgium, and also taught AI for so many years. I guess I've seen some of my, students, postdoc, Patrice was one of them, indeed. And, growing old, those people recognize you, but you use not to recognize them. And so I'm pretty proud to see a lot of them here in the room. And indeed, I'm going to tell you a little bit what my vision of FARI is. FARI is mainly in the hand of Carl, Karen, Hans. I've seen Hans also, he used to be one of the FARI founders too. And this is two of my books. Those books, I wrote them a lot of years ago, I think 7, 8 years ago. And I was not so much interested in, the algorithm shaping us. You might know that in our university in ULB, there is a bunch of scientists coming from human science, like Antoinette Rouvroy, Thomas Bern, people at the Perelman Center, who created this notion of algorithmic governance, in French, gouvernementalité algorithmique. It's even more snobbish when you say it in French. And they came to me. And because they do human science, they're not so well, used in algorithm, came to me and said, do you want to be part of this discussion, on this reflection about, the way algorithms is shaping more and more our life. So discussing with them, I realized that indeed that was an interesting topic. And when you grow old after years of research, you realize that you can allow yourself not to do a lot of science anymore, but you're losing your neurons and you're growing old, so you can do a little bit more politics or social science. And a little bit this is what I'm going to propose to you. It will not be so much a technical talk, but more a political talk, or a kind of social talk in order to argue and support the FARI initiative. So when I wrote this book, I was not realizing that perhaps 5, 6 years later, there would be a set of incredible books, warning us about this convergence between two kinds of power: the algorithmic power, the one that really shape us, because we use them on a daily basis, and the political power. And when you have a convergence between those two powers, the executive power of algorithms and the executive power of classical politics, people, then you have those worrying books, very nightmare book like the one of Giuliano da Empoli. You can read all of those books, their famous book, bestseller book, and he warned us about this convergence, techno-fascism, autocracy, and obviously, it would be fast to describe the algorithmic power. We are indeed under algorithmic control for many years. There is nearly 2 generations of algorithms that I like to distinguish. The algorithm that recommend, so you could turn the light, you could stop them, but most of the time you use them on a daily basis, like the algorithms, the GPS algorithms, like Waze, Google Map, the recommendation algorithms, you could decide not to use them, but I know that all of you use them on a daily basis. And you have Tinder. This is not the kind of algorithm that I use myself, but my son are using it a lot, and to grow for using them. And then there are another generation of algorithms that are even more worried too. It's the algorithm that not only recommend but obliges, kind of mandatory algorithms. One of my favorite examples is in France, the Parcoursup algorithm, the one that you can't avoid if you are young people and you finish your obligatory secondary school, and if you want to reach university or high-level education, you have to go through this algorithm that at the end of the day will decide about the university you can register to. And we have a similar algorithm here in Belgium, le décret inscription, which is somewhat an algorithm for younger kids, but also an algorithm that decides the kind of school where you can register your kids. And who wrote these algorithms? None of us. So even if those algorithms supposed to care for our public goods, no, I don't think the public was really involved in the coding and in the writing of the algorithm. That is really a worrying situation that I think FARI might try to moderate or to improve. And you have also, for instance, in Belgium, we're very proud of that. We have tax on web, which to some extent prevent your freedom to fraud taxes, because most of the things are already, are already filled. You don't have to fill that. Most of the things are filled, so that reduces a lot your freedom. I guess this is for the public good because you have to pay your taxes, but you see that there is a kind of, trade-off between, algorithms that prevent your freedom and, algorithms try to rule the public good. So this techno-fascism has never been as well illustrated by this Doge initiative by Elon Musk. You've seen really the power of algorithm to fire, I don't know how many federal employees that have been fired just by an algorithm, And you can imagine that this Doge initiative was being coded by something like 20 or 30 young PhD, whatever, coders that wrote the line of code that fired, I think, 10,000 of federal employees. So you see the power of algorithm when it is finally put in the bad hand, in that case, the bad hand of this coalition between a tech fascist, Elon Musk, and a simple fascist, Donald Trump. Okay, no, okay. Thanks for them both. I've realized really the invasion of COVID has been a very critical period, and it has a very positive period for the FARI, because obviously no one would complain about the disappearance of COVID, but COVID was kind of beneficial for FARI for two reasons. One of them is because we realized how rapidly, when you have a crisis situation like a pandemic, Marius Gilbert this morning was referring to this pandemic. You remember him, he was a very important actor during this, a media actor at least, during this COVID crisis, and he mentioned it, and you realize how many algorithms were invading our life, just to try to manage to survive this crisis. You remember algorithms tracing each other, this Corona alert that never worked, by the way, but that was an algorithm that we were supposed to download and install on our smartphone. There was algorithm even to get to a restaurant. You had to show your QR code to get to a restaurant. I remember being in Italy back in that time, and there was some barrier to get into a restaurant that would open just if you were showing your QR code, So that was totally automated. You had to be vaccinated in order to get to this restaurant. And then you had algorithm to take appointment for the PCR testing, or even algorithm to take appointment for getting to vaccinating yourself. So you realize how many algorithm was invading our life. But if you remember, the many medias, the media news that were criticizing those algorithms, telling that there was no transparency. We didn't know where the data were. You got to a restaurant, you had to show your QR code. Maybe you were with your mistress, or I don't know, with someone else, and you didn't know what kind of usage the data, people having the data would do about those data. No real efficiency. Corona alert, forget about that, but was a disaster. No citizen participation. No one of us take a part in, coding and understanding these algorithms. No agility, no adhesion success. So, and then COVID was good for us because, as you know, FARI was created by the Recovery Fund, the one that Europe benefited after the crisis. So COVID was a key moment in order to illustrate how algorithm was becoming very important in our daily life and was, ruling the creation of FARI. So what I'm trying to develop, and you'll see that more and more, what I do believe that in this idea of numerical commons is the idea that the algorithms that are shaping our life should be developed, handled by three kinds of developers. It's a kind of new way, a social GitHub if you want. Definitely some expert, because you need computational expert, and also expert in the domain for which you want to build this algorithm, whatever, mobility, energy transfer, or access to public schools. You could imagine that when you want to register your kids with an algorithm, you'd like to have a professor or the parents or perhaps even the teachers being involved, so they are expert in this, their own domain. But more importantly, citizen randomly selected. I believe that this is a key aspect, and it's not at all done for any kind of algorithm development. You need expert in algorithm development, but you also need random citizens. And you need, I guess, a few of politicians, because this is the electoral way. Perhaps if you, at the end of the day, you disagree, you might leave the last word to some politicians that have been elected to defend some kind of ideology. That it's mainly when you don't succeed to agree on the kind of algorithms. So it's a kind of social coding. We are computer scientists. We are very used to collaborate through some platforms like the GitHub one. And I guess this has to be extended to laymen, to naive people. Even not coders, not algorithmic experts should take part in the development of some algorithm. That could have been the case for COVID, for instance. I'll show you and I illustrate how I think that could have been done for the COVID crisis. So some of the use cases that I've tried to promote with my colleagues here from FARI, what I've tried to promote for the public goods, some kind of pilot where access to school. I'm still very much interested in trying to have an hand and have an access on those algorithms that decide about the schools you want to register to. The COVID vaccination testing, you'll see what we try to do with that back in time. Collective mobility. I think mobility is such a nightmare in Brussels that there is a lot of ways to improve that. And I know that some of our colleagues in FARI, Gianluca and others, they're trying to help us to improve the problem of mobility. Mobility is not only a complex issue in Brussels, like it is in any place in the world, but it is also a good place where citizens should be engaged much more than they have been. If you remember, all of us, the Good Move, it was called like that. If you, but the name would have been Bad Move. But anyway, at that time, you remember, even the government fall with that Good Move things, never succeed to stand up after that. But still, you realize the importance of mobility for Brussels. And, another of my favorite pilot, another favorite use case is energy community. Well, it's a perfect example. You share energy with your neighbors. You have solar panels. Perhaps you produce more than you consume. And how are you going to share the energy among yourselves? This is a perfect example of a commons at a local scale, and where an algorithm that have been decided by you, the neighbors, can really help us to shape your life. When do you launch your laundry? When do you load your car? This is definitely something that you can decide among yourself with the good algorithms to do so. And it's very hard to convince our energy distributor this day in Brussels, Sibelga, to adopt this kind of algorithms. Right. So FARI was created, well, not really created, but thought, imagined, conceived several years ago in Montreal. And that was an interesting time because in Montreal, as you know, and I'm mentioning Montreal because in Montreal there are among the best minds in AI, as you may know, Benjo, Mila, whatever. We heard someone from Toronto this morning. Montreal is a very key place for AI, but I realized that Montreal, the place, the city, has exactly the same kind of difficulties. Discussing with the Montreal citizens, they have exactly the same kind of difficulty that we meet in Brussels. So even the best mind of AI in Montreal, they don't succeed to improve the life of Montreal citizens. So there is something to modify here, there's something to change here, and so we created FARI a little bit in the spirit of Mila, but much more oriented towards the public goods, towards the Brussels citizens. And I want to make a warm tribute Caroline, who was a very important actor to FARI creation, and obviously I miss her a lot, and I think we do all miss her a lot. So now we have FARI, and I really recommend you to move and discover FARI and visit FARI. We heard a lot about digital twin this morning. In my talk, you won't hear anything about LLM. This morning, there was just about LLM. Most of the algorithm that I'm going to show you, that I'm going to demonstrate and discuss, has nothing to do with LLM. You know, you can do a lot with old-fashioned AI, optimization, data mining, without using any kind of LLM and still making a lot of good services to the public and the Brussels citizens. So FARI was creating with a lot of, pilot in mind, like energy, health and well-being. COVID was a nice example, obviously, of public health, mobility, media democracy, public sector, and administration. So I'm going to turn back a little bit during COVID. We developed at FARI with some of my best students, my best researchers, back in time. I think it was in 21 when there was this campaign of vaccination. We decided at FARI to help the organism in charge of vaccination in Brussels. And this is a very interesting pilot because this is a very good example in case. That cockpit of vaccination was supposed to help to organize the vaccination campaign for you remember vaccination, it was a very complex process. There was 3 vaccines in town. You could select which one you want. There are 2 doses. We didn't know how many vaccinator centers we should establish in Brussels. We didn't know how many vaccinators should you hire in those different centers. And we thought that, and we wanted to help COCOM, which was in charge, with I remember that back in time with a very nice lady who really we really had the will to improve the whole vaccination campaign. I remember the name, she was Inge Neven. And we discussed a lot with her, and we developed a full cockpit. And even we demoed this full cockpit to some anonymous people that you might recognize in the slides. They were very interested in that. They were very convinced that, a vaccination can help. Like in the slide upstairs, you see a map with the addition of vaccination in the different districts of Brussels, because as you know, as you remember, none of the district of Brussels were all, accepting to be vaccinated. So, well, we were following that. We were doing some kind of data mining about it. But most interestingly, we developed an algorithm, and you see the point, you'll see this is an interesting case. We developed an algorithm in order to match the available slots for vaccination with the people that wanted to be vaccinated. And that is an algorithm called Gale-Shapley. By the way, it is exactly the same algorithm that people use for access to school and access to university. You have 2 sets of agents, the vaccination slots on one side and the people that want to be vaccinated on the other side. And you try to match them in the most optimal way. And we developed the algorithm. They never use it, and I can tell you later why they never used it. There is a reason for that, and I want to improve that, and that will be my recipes for FARI to be more successful in those software later in time. But one interesting aspect is that you had to order to sort the priority of the people needing to be vaccinated. Who should be vaccinated first? Depending on which kind of, job, perhaps a school driver or school teacher might be vaccinated before, some functionary on some public administration, or perhaps the bus driver should be vaccinated first. The oldest people should be vaccinated before the youngest one. And you realize that this is not to be decided by politicians. Who should decide about it? According to me, we should decide about it. Us should decide about it, And we try to make this experience possible. Brussels is very proud to tell that this is a city with a lot of citizen participation. I've never seen a lot of citizen participation in Brussels, but that could have been a good example. Perhaps in 1 or 2 days, by giving phone call, etc., making a platform where people can reach and discuss, we could have decided about the right order. We didn't do that. But you realize that in some countries, the order was different. Perhaps in Japan, I remember discussing with some of my friends in Japan, the youngest were vaccinated before the older. This is a cultural thing, It was like that in Japan. Why should it be like that in Brussels, etc.? You see, that is a perfect example where you need public deliberation, you need public participation in order to put that into the algorithm. At the end of the day, the algorithm will take the appointment for you, but it will respect the priority that you will have decide yourself. We didn't succeed, and why we didn't succeed? Because the adoption was a failure, and it's often a failure with the public administration in Brussels. And I do believe that one of the reasons is because there is a lot of conservatism in the public administration. Sometimes they lack the competence in order to take the tool and make it run locally. So I think that one way of succeeding with our developers, our young developers, being researchers, being postdoc, whatever, I think university is an indispensable partner for the public administration. Our university, we are a public good. University is a public good, is publicly financing, so we should be interacting with our public administration, not only the consultants company, but also the university. And I think one way we should do that, I took that lessons after many years of failures, I think one good way is that one of your researchers doing the pilot should spend, I don't know, 1 year. You have to develop the, the whole stratagem to make that possible, but spend 1 year in the public administration making the transition between the pilot that has been developed with a very nice algorithm in university and the real local problem of the public administration, the software they use, the culture they have, and these guys should spend 1 year in order to make this transition smooth and possible. Right, and by the way, pretty fun what happened in France, because the vaccinations website that was the most visited at the end of the day was developed by a young guy in his room. And this guy, I don't remember the name, he was even decorated by Emmanuel Macron. He developed a software called Vitmados. That was the best, and this is why that inspired me a lot. Young people can, in university or elsewhere, in high school, can develop very interesting solutions. That solution need to be, in that case, people use it because it was just a website. But if it is a public administration, you have to develop and put it in the public administration for the people to use it. Another very good example that I like is energy community. I already mentioned that, and I think this is one terrific example of, participatory democracy at a local scale with interesting AI software. And last reality, I'm going close to the end of the talk. Last reality is that we're living a very difficult situation in Brussels. I'm not informing anything about that. That we lack a government for nearly 2 years now. And we had a lot of budgetary issues. People are trying to find money everywhere. And you read more and more, I'm not inventing that, you read more and more of those things in the news. Last 5 years, Brussels has spent, 200, 300, 400 millions of euro to, consultants company, to existing software company like Paradigm and others, and there are a lot of people questioning and wondering what we did with that money. And it's not always clear. I'm not saying that they haven't done anything with that money, but there's a real issue about, the budgetary issue in Brussels. A lot of money is being spent in consultant company for developing AI software. I think that a little part of this money could be spent for FARI already. If you take just 1/10 of this money at Paradigm and 1/10 of the money spent for Deloitte, you could finance 5 FARI, not only 1, but 5, I guess. And but I need to convince the political, to make that spending. But you see, this is more and more what we heard. So I hope that perhaps FARI will be financed in the next budgetary plan in Brussels. So my last slide is this idea of numerical commons. This notion of commons hasn't been invented by me, as you know. There is a famous researcher in economy called Elinor Strom. She got the Nobel Prize, one of the few ladies in economy who finally got the Nobel Prize, and she was very famous for discussing this idea of common. Common was a kind of self-organization, governance, and she put a lot of criteria to make those commons working well. One of them was locality. So I really insist, we had a slide before, I don't remember who was the speaker, but there was a slide with locality versus globality, or localism versus globalism. I think that what I've discussed so far works well in a local situation. And Brussels is the right scale. You know, we have a lot of problems for Brussels mobility. I remember the lady discussing about Riga, and she told we have exactly the same problem in Riga than indeed in Montreal or perhaps in Brussels. But you can test the solution locally, and if they work well locally, you can franchise them, and perhaps, you know, I'd love to see a lot of FARI Institute elsewhere in the world, you know, in Riga, in Montreal. As I told you, they don't have FARI, they have MILA, they have a lot of other institutes, but nothing like FARI. So I'd like to see a lot of FARI in every place, but FARI will develop solution on a local scale, and then if it works, and I think it can work at the local scale, because Elinor Rostrom mentioned that. And by the way, before 1 year or two before her death, she was very fascinated by the open software community, like GitHub, Linux, whatever. She loved those community because she found in those community a lot of ideas that she found back in the Middle Age, you know, where commons was not obviously about software, but about, you know, how you rule a local resource, like a lake, like a forest, or you rule those things. And I guess that exactly the same problem occurs with algorithms. Or you rule, or you decide about an algorithm. And so she wrote, it's not the most famous of her texts, but she wrote a very nice text about the open software community and finding a lot of parallels. So my wish for FARI is to push forward this parallel that she was one of the first to discover between the old common ideas and numerical commons. So long life to FARI, and I thank you for listening to me. There's one.
Test. Just perhaps thinking of LLMs and the most compute intense machine learning algorithms and AIs, which are the ones that can be more ergonomic and more adaptive. How do we make them local, given they require so much resources in the first place? Can we perhaps pool common resources on a local scale to make such systems available in for instance, small self-organized data centers, something like that?
Thanks for your question. I didn't mention any LLM in my talk because, as I said, I think we can do a lot with AI without even resorting and discussing LLM. But if you go to LLM, I think we'll answer two things. First, before even answering your question, I think that our world will have to take a strong decision about, you know, the use of LLM and the shortage of, and the problem of CO2, energy consumption, and the environmental disaster of LLM. And do we want our kids, every of those kids, to use on a daily basis ChatGPT when we know that by doing that, I think they are threatening the world in 20 years from now, because we know that the use of LLM and those, you know, chatbot, whatever, the way they scale right now, they're creating an incredible threat to anything we try to, you know, resolve with the climate change. So this is one of the worst actors right now for the environmental disaster. So basically, we need to find a trade-off between using that and destroying our world, you know, making our planet not viable any longer. And so I try to sensitize my kids and my small kids with that issue, because they don't have that in mind at all. You know, they use ChatGPT like it would be any kind of software, and it is not any kind of software. We heard about, you know, the water consumption. I had some friend living in Canada that was telling me that one of the reasons why the United States want to colonize Canada is because they have an incredible amount of water that is more and more needed to cool down those LLMs. So definitely, you're right. There's a huge problem here. So you can make it local. You can use an open source and a tiny LLM and enrich it with some of your local data. This is a kind of RAG technology, put it locally. This is what we try, for instance, to achieve at ULB and some public administration. Yet, the problem persists. Even the small one, the tiny one, open one, is still a very high electricity consumer, less, obviously, than perhaps the one you use on OpenAI and Google, whatever, but there's still a lot of consuming. So I really believe that it slows down a little bit the cooling effect if you try to more and more adopt small LLM on a local basis. It wouldn't resolve that. A key question would be, do we need it as much as we're using it today? Knowing that the world is warming up so much. Thank you. So this is really a farewell one.
And Hugues actually mentioned it already. There is another person here in the room who was quite instrumental in the foundation of FARI back in the day, who has been critical to its development in the first 5 years, because we're almost reaching our 5th anniversary already. And so we thought, even though he's not on a day-to-day basis involved in FARI anymore, we know he's never far, we are never far from his heart, and he's never far from our heart. So he deserves his moment in the spotlight as well. So please welcome on stage Hans de Kank.
Glad I didn't prepare any slide deck because, of course, Hugues and myself, we go way back, and I can only subscribe anything that you said now, just with your farewell talk. So I think also the advice you gave, I can only also underline that, and I think that there's a bright future ahead. Still a lot of work, but I think everybody in the room here also knows that we're always wanting to build more transparency when it comes to technology that is 24/7 around us. So let's make it happen. And everybody with this expertise, computer scientists, social scientists, that's what FARI is about. We have to work together. Work is not done, but we're getting there step by step. Thanks.